Hello, everyone. Thank you for tuning in. I just want to do a quick video about the astrological weather right now. So we have a partial lunar eclipse in Pisces this evening, and then in 5 days on the 22nd, we're going to have the fall equinox, and there's a lot happening in between, but it's big time reset energy. This is the first eclipse that we've had since the big one back in April, and there's just a lot of interesting parallels, a lot of bookend energies. I'm noticing for myself storylines that were active during the eclipse in April that went dormant for the last couple of months are now active again, which is really interesting. And in a few videos that I've talked about the eclipse, I've mentioned how historically, starting with the Sumerians, they always thought that eclipses were really only bad omens for bad things, right? So imposter kings, tyrants, things like that. And the imposter tyrant, or the imposter king that is a tyrant, that got thrown out of the tower before the big April eclipse was P. Diddy. That's when they did all of those raids on his property about a week or two before the eclipse. Well, wouldn't you know, the day before this partial eclipse, they arrested him in New York, right? Isn't that interesting? Talk about a bookend. He has all this money. He should have bought an astrologer, I'll tell you that much. But I digress. Eclipses, for me, I've always associated with, you know how sometimes when you download new software on your computer, you need to do a hard reboot, right? You need to shut it down completely and then reboot it from scratch. That's what an eclipse really reminds me of. And so it'll be interesting to see how that plays out in general. I pulled a couple of cards just to see what the cards wanted to say about this eclipse. And I can tell you the energy just in general today is so strange. I have had so many bizarre encounters, too many to even mention, but even beyond bizarre, there's been a lot of stuff in my peripheral that's really interesting, a lot of like car crashes in the neighborhood and explosions and random things like that. So but I'm seeing it mostly in the peripheral, right? So I just want to say that it's like, it's not you, it's the eclipse. If you're going through it right now, it is not you, it is the astrological weather, right? So one of the first questions that I asked the cards was, what is basically the energy of this lunar eclipse that we're getting? And I pulled the Fool card, right? So talk about the hard reboot, right? This is the 0 point energy, right? Kind of starting, not necessarily starting from scratch from us, but it's again that reboot where it's like new software is uploading, and typically when new software is uploaded, there's some obsolete software that's getting kind of pushed out of the way, right? So I'm seeing that. How we're supposed to deal with this energy came up as the Queen of Swords, right? So the Queen of Swords talks to me about not emotionally reacting to anything, right? She has a great poker face. Less is more. She's going to let it play out. And that's definitely been the lesson that I've had to hold on to for the last 48 hours at least, of just don't react. Don't react. It's not what you think it is, right? It's like imagine you are in an episode of Game of Thrones, right? And there's 15 episodes in the season. You are in episode 3. Don't try to predict, how the next couple of episodes are going to play out, because we know Game of Thrones, you can never predict it, right? So we are in the Game of Thrones universe right now. That's how I feel. And one thing that was coming out with this, especially with the Fool, I don't know why this triggered this memory for whatever reason, but the Fool energy, when I pulled that card, made me think of those moments where you have a dream that's so visceral that when you wake up from it, you think that it actually happened. And I had one of those dreams about a week or two ago where for like the first half of my day, I thought it was a memory, or at least I was processing it as if it was a memory. And it feels like there's something like that in the energy with this eclipse in terms of what's happening, right? And in terms of what the eclipse was touching, it said the world, right? So you could say that means all of the above. It's touching everything. But then the world, I'm also just seeing as like the paradigm, right? The OS, right? Like I was saying, rebooting your computer to download new software. It's like the world can kind of be that OS platform for a couple of different reasons, but primarily because those 4 figures in the 4 corners typically represent, the Christianized version is the 4 gospels, but it's like the 4 perspectives on the narrative, right? Like the 4 people that write the story, so to speak. But it's like that's what I see is changing, right? That's something that I had said, I think, in the last video about unsinging the song that was the original song that kind of sang the world into creation. It's like that's the thing that's being addressed. And as I'm saying that, I'm like, oh well, P. Diddy is technically, I wouldn't call him a singer, but a musician, I guess. Whatever. I digress. So I think all of that is really interesting. The other thing about the frame rate of reality keeps coming up. I think I had mentioned this in my last video, one of the last two. I was talking about how it seems like there's two different timelines right now, and we're waiting for them to sync up. So you could call them the old and the new. And the new just kind of like blinks into existence every now and then, but it doesn't feel like it's sticking. And it has something to do with the frame rate of reality. It's the only way that I can really explain it, but it's like the visual that I get is if you've ever ridden on the subway, or I guess any train, you know, say you're taking a northbound train and then your train passes a southbound train, right? When that southbound train blows past you, you can barely even see it. It's just a blur, right? But then there's those rare moments where you wind up passing a train that's heading in the same direction as you, right? Where everything kind of synchronizes. And for those moments where you're going at the same speed, the same frame rate, you can see into it clearly, right? That's like the best analogy that I can get right now for what it is that I'm seeing in terms of things trying to come in, where it's like just trying to synchronize to kind of hold the vision. But there is some sort of weird timeline pinch that's happening right now. And I remember thinking this around the eclipse, but now it's starting to make a little bit more sense in terms of like the book ending, because again, it's like there's so many parallels between the stories that were active the weeks around the eclipse and the stories that are active right now. And the way that I'm seeing that, I drew a little analogy. It's like, imagine that this is the timeline, right? As if this is like one straight line. But on this side, this is April, and on the other side here, this is where we are now in September. And this loop in between is the summer, right? So it's like April and September, it's like they're right next to each other. It's the only way that I can describe it, right? But like I was saying before, in terms of having a dream that you think is so visceral and waking up from it and thinking that it's a memory until you realize, oh, wait, that was just a dream. It's like something like that is about to happen. That's what I honestly think is going to be the next week or two, where it's like whatever your personal, I don't want to say your personal nightmare, but you know what I'm saying. It's like I think there's going to be things that this is where that Queen of Swords energy comes in terms of not reacting. It's like it has something to do with the observer effect, right? Because it's like if you react to something, you kind of crystallize it. Or if you engage with something, you kind of crystallize it. But if you just let it play out, just observe it as if you're watching a movie or something like that, it's like it will turn out to have just been a dream, or maybe even like I guess a misunderstanding. But it's like I feel like this is primarily going to be referring to things that are happening in your story, but not happening in your scene, right? So it's like what I mean by that is all the world's a stage. What happens to the storylines that are taking place off stage, right? A lot of times we project onto that story and we assume that things are playing out in a particular direction just because we assume it. But if you don't actually see it happening and nobody is observing that, then it's like technically, according to quantum dynamics, quantum physics, whatever, it's like, does that story even exist if it's not being observed? And I've experimented with this on many different occasions where the best example, I might have told this story before, but I'll tell it again. I was in a funky living situation a few years ago, and somebody that I was living with was in the process of being evicted because of all different issues. And because of the way that this individual had behaved in the past, everybody expected them to behave a particular way in the future. But this individual was no contact. Nobody saw them, heard from them, had no idea what was going on. But they kept projecting this story that they were going to behave this way. It was an affirmation. They are going to, they are going to, they are going to. So I kept pushing back and saying, not on my timeline, not on my timeline, nope, 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 nope. And what I knew is like nobody was observing this, right? This is taking place in the unrendered space of the narrative, the blank space of the narrative. So I started projecting my own story. And in that particular story, the thing that I projected was that their ego did not want to be examined, right? They did not want to be under the microscope. They didn't want no smoke, as the kids would say, and that they were going to come up with some sort of story that made them feel better about themselves, where they were actually choosing to leave, and we were all the losers and blah, blah, blah. And that was exactly what played out. So anything that's happening in your storyline right now off stage, script it. Script it. Don't be telling yourself they're gonna. Don't empower no enemies. Don't empower any of the false kings, right? It's Game of Thrones season. I'll say that much. It is Game of Thrones season, and the P Diddy's of the world are losing their crowns, y'all. Okay, trust and believe, and trust and believe with P Diddy. Okay, she ain't going down without a fight. You know that much. Okay, unless he winds up experiencing the same fate as Jeffrey Epstein, I have a feeling it's going to be, what would you call it? There's going to be repercussions. So that's all I got for y'all today. Best of luck, and I will see you on the next one. Bye, y'all.